It starts with something that feels routine. A simple traffic stop. But don't be fooled. Two corrupt cops, thinking they can get away with another act of brutality. Thinking they can take the life of a black woman and walk away clean. But this time, they made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because she wasn't just anyone. She was the mother of a man they never should have crossed. A man capable of tearing down their entire system, brick by brick. Her death wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. A spark that would ignite a cold, relentless fight for justice. And what happens next? It'll leave you breathless. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming. So sit back, get ready. And before we dive in, let us know what time it is where you're watching, and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We read every single one. Mason Hollow wasn't the kind of place you'd expect something terrible to happen. A small Alabama town, tucked between stretches of cotton fields and winding back roads. It moved at the speed of church bells and porch swings. People knew each other by name, waved at passing cars, even if they didn't know who was inside. You could feel the history in the cracked sidewalks, the faded storefronts, the old oak tree by the courthouse that had stood through generations of change, and too often, the things that didn't. And in the heart of Mason Hollow lived Evelyn Carter. 75 years old, standing just a little over 5 feet tall. She was a woman of quiet strength and gentle eyes. She'd taught half the town's children back when the local elementary school was a single-story building with creaky wooden floors. Even after retiring, Evelyn stayed busy. Wednesday afternoons, she'd bring fresh cornbread to the church potluck. Sundays, she'd sit in the second pew, singing hymns, soft but steady. She kept peppermint candies in her purse for the neighborhood kids. Always had a kind word for anyone who needed it. Evelyn was the sort of person who made a place feel like home. But the thing about towns like Mason Hollow, beneath the surface, beneath the quiet smiles and polite nods, there are shadows that stretch long. The kind that settle into the bones of a place, so familiar that folks stop noticing them altogether. They call it the way things are. And the men who wore the badges here, they liked it that way. Sheriff Dean Holt had been in charge of the Mason Hollow Sheriff's Department for over a decade. Mid-40s, stocky build, with a weathered face and a stare that dared you to question him. Folks said he ran a tight ship, kept order, made sure the wrong kind didn't get too comfortable. But what they really meant was that Holt decided who belonged, and who didn't. Always by his side was Deputy Wade Tucker. Younger, maybe mid-30s, still trying to prove himself. His uniform always crisp, boots polished. But there was something brittle beneath it. He followed Holt's lead, laughed at Holt's jokes. And when it came time to pull someone over, to flash those lights in the rearview mirror, Tucker was eager. Too eager. On the surface, Mason Hollow was peaceful. But for some, peace came at a price. A look held too long. A question asked one too many times. And if Sheriff Holt decided you didn't fit that piece, well, your life could get hard, real fast. Evelyn knew this. She'd seen it over the years. Young men pulled aside, questioned for walking down the wrong street at the wrong hour. Complaints filed, then buried. Stories whispered over coffee, never loud enough to make a difference. But Evelyn wasn't one to stir trouble. She kept to her routine. Choir practice on Tuesdays. Visiting her daughter Lisa on Thursdays. Grocery shopping on Fridays. It was a Thursday night when everything changed. Evelyn had just finished dinner with Lisa and her grandkids. They talked about the upcoming spring festival, about planting tomatoes in the backyard, about the little things that make life feel steady. She hugged them tight before leaving, got into her old sedan, and started the short drive home. The roads were mostly empty that time of night. Just the hum of the engine, the faint flicker of porch lights, and the familiar turns she'd made 1,000 times. But at the corner of Sycamore and 3rd, she saw the red and blue lights flare up behind her. The sheriff's cruiser. Sheriff Holt and Deputy Tucker had been sitting outside the local diner, sipping coffee, watching the town drift by. And when Evelyn's car rolled past, they followed. Maybe it was the time of night. Maybe it was just the routine of power. Or maybe it was something deeper, something unspoken. Either way, they pulled her over. Evelyn eased her car to the shoulder, rolled down the window, and waited. Calm. No reason to worry, she thought. She'd lived in this town her whole life. She wasn't doing anything wrong, just heading home. But when Sheriff Holt approached, his hand resting heavy on his holster, there was no kindness in his eyes. He asked where she was going, why she was out so late. His voice, sharp, clipped. Evelyn answered softly, explaining she just left her daughter's house. Then he asked for her license and registration. Evelyn reached for her purse, moving slow, deliberate, but the tension was already rising. Holt's hand hovered near his belt. Tucker stood behind him, watching, waiting. Evelyn glanced up, her voice steady, but confused. Is there a problem, Sheriff? That's all it took. Because in Mason Hollow, sometimes a question feels like a challenge. Sometimes the people meant to protect you are the ones you need protection from. And in that moment, on that quiet street, beneath the glow of a flickering streetlight, Evelyn Carter became the target. What happened next wasn't about justice. It wasn't about law. It was about control. About fear, wrapped in authority. And in the seconds that followed, everything Evelyn knew about Mason Hollow shattered. But that part of the story, the part where peace is broken and shadows fall, that's still to come. For now, remember this. Evelyn Carter wasn't a threat. She wasn't dangerous. She was just a grandmother heading home on a Thursday night. And sometimes, that's all it takes. There's a moment in every story when the world splits in two. The way things were, and the way they'll never be again. For Evelyn Carter, that moment came beneath the glare of a sheriff's cruiser spotlight. Her hand halfway to her purse. Her voice still soft. But to Sheriff Dean Holt, that soft voice didn't matter. Not here. Not now. He'd already decided what he wanted to see. And Wade Tucker, he wasn't about to question his boss. Not tonight. The night air in Mason Hollow was still thick with the smell of honeysuckle and distant rain. But under the weight of those flashing lights, that peace twisted into something sharp. Evelyn's fingers curled around her worn leather wallet, just as they had 1,000 times before. Her motions were slow, steady, habitual. But Holt's hand had already shifted. His thumb unfastened the strap on his holster. He leaned in just a little closer. The tension between them wasn't about rules or regulations. It was about fear. Not Evelyn's, but Holt's. The kind of fear that breeds when power feels challenged, even by something as simple as a question. Keep your hands where I can see them, Holt barked. Voice louder than it needed to be. The kind of voice that wasn't about safety, but about control. Evelyn froze. Her heart racing faster now. She could feel it pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what she'd done wrong. Her license was right there. Her registration too. But the way Holt's eyes narrowed. The way Tucker hovered just behind him like a shadow waiting to move. It made her skin prickle. I was just, she started. But words weren't enough. Not when Holt had already made up his mind. She lifted her hand slowly, carefully, showing the wallet between her fingers. That was it. Sheriff Holt's gun cleared the holster in a flash. The metal caught the light, just before the first shot rang out. The sound tore through the quiet street like a thunderclap. One shot, then another. Evelyn stumbled backward, her back hitting the side of her car. The wallet slipped from her hand, landing at her feet. She gasped. Eyes wide. Hands pressing instinctively against her chest, where the heat bloomed. Wet and hot. The second bullet struck harder, sending her to her knees. "Dean," Tucker's voice cracked, his hands frozen at his sides. "She wasn't." Holt didn't answer. His breathing was sharp now, ragged, like he'd just sprinted a mile. Evelyn's voice trembled as she looked up, the world tilting sideways. "Why?" she whispered. "Why?" But the question went unanswered. Her fingers, spotted with age, pressed feebly against the wounds. But the blood was too much. It soaked through her pale blouse, spread across the cracked pavement beneath her knees. Her purse lay open beside her, the wallet still inside. Her registration neatly tucked inside it, just like always. Sheriff Holt stood frozen for a moment, eyes locked on the woman gasping for air beneath him. Then he shifted, fast. Like the weight of the moment hadn't quite hit him yet. He glanced over his shoulder at Tucker. "You saw it," Holt snapped. She moved fast. She reached for something. Tucker swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "Dean, You saw it," Holt repeated, louder now. She reached. And Wade Tucker, he wasn't strong enough to fight it. Not then. Not there. He nodded. Barely. Just enough. The flashing red and blue lights kept spinning, washing the scene in their rhythmic glow. But no one came. No bystanders. No witnesses. Not on this side street. Not at this hour. And Holt, he knew it. That's why he turned off the dash cam before stepping out of the cruiser. Why Tucker's body cam had conveniently run out of battery. Holt always made sure of that. Small town. Small oversight. No footage. No proof. Just words. Words that Holt could shape, like he always did. She was reaching into her bag, he muttered, pacing now. Hands shaking as the adrenaline cooled in his veins. Didn't comply. Feared for safety. Suspect became a threat. Use of force necessary. It sounded rehearsed, because it was. Holt had written that same story too many times before. The only thing that changed was the name. But tonight wasn't just another report. Evelyn Carter wasn't just another line in a file. Her eyes drifted shut. Her body falling still. The quiet that followed was worse than the gunfire. It settled heavy in the air. Pressed into the cracks of the pavement, where her blood pooled and ran down into the gutter. Carried away by the slow trickle of rain that had started to fall. The sheriff straightened. Holstered his weapon. "Call it in," he told Tucker. His voice was calm now. Too calm. Tucker fumbled for the radio, his hand shaking as he pressed the button. Officer involved, shooting. Suspect down. Need medical at Sycamore and 3rd. But by the time the ambulance arrived, there was nothing left to save. Evelyn Carter, teacher, grandmother, neighbor, was gone. And Holt? He was already working on the paperwork. Already preparing the phrases he'd use. Already practicing the look of regret he'd wear at the press conference that wouldn't last more than a day. They'd call it tragic. They'd call it unfortunate. They'd say all the right words to make the town forget. They always did. But what Holt didn't know, what Tucker couldn't feel through the haze of his fear, was that this wasn't going to disappear. Because somewhere out there, far from the quiet streets of Mason Hollow, there was a man who wouldn't forget. A man who'd been trained to wait, to watch. And when the time was right, to strike. And for Sheriff Holt and Deputy Tucker, that time was coming. Soon. By morning, Mason Hollow looked the same as it always did. The sun crept up slow over the cotton fields, casting long shadows across the courthouse lawn. The diner opened on time. The church bells rang. Folks went about their day like nothing had happened. Because in Mason Hollow, that's how it worked. Tragedy didn't knock on every door. It showed up quietly behind closed ones. The official story came together before the coffee cooled on Sheriff Holt's desk. The report said Evelyn Carter had been stopped for erratic driving. That she'd failed to comply. That officers feared for their safety when she reached into her bag. It was just the right mix of legal jargon and vague phrasing to make sure no one would look too close. And no one did. A local paper ran a small piece on page 6, just beneath the weather report. Elderly woman killed in police incident. Tragic misunderstanding, says sheriff. No picture. No interviews. No questions. The mayor, a man who'd known Holt since high school, called it a regrettable event. Promised an internal review. But everyone in town knew what that meant. A few forms. A few meetings. And then silence. Always silence. Lisa Carter, Evelyn's daughter, sat at the kitchen table the next morning. Staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. The house felt colder. Emptier. Like the walls themselves had lost something. She read the article twice. Tears blurring the words. It didn't sound like her mother. None of it did. But what could she do? Who would listen? There was no lawyer knocking on her door. No reporters asking questions. Just neighbors who brought over casseroles and whispered apologies that felt too small for the hole left behind. She tried to hold it together for her kids. Tried to explain that grandma wasn't coming back. But there are some things no words can soften. The funeral was small. Family. Close friends. A handful of neighbors who remembered Evelyn's kindness, the way she never missed Sunday service, the way she always had a smile, a story, a piece of peppermint for the kids. They gathered in the little white church on the hill. Sang the hymns. Bowed their heads. Sheriff Holt didn't come. Tucker didn't either. There wasn't even an official from the department to offer condolences. But there was one seat left empty at the front of the church. Isaiah Carter didn't come home. Lisa had left him voicemails. Texted him the news. Mom's gone. They killed her. She said the words out loud once, just to hear how they sounded. But they never made sense. Not when it was Evelyn. Not when it was someone who never hurt anybody. She waited for a response. A call. Anything. But there was nothing. Isaiah Carter was gone. Had been for years after his last deployment. He vanished from the grid. No social media. No phone calls. No address anyone could pin down. Just a name, somewhere out west, maybe. Or maybe overseas again. No one really knew. Even Evelyn had stopped asking. Trusting that wherever he was safe. Or at least, as safe as a man like Isaiah could be. But now Lisa wondered where her brother was. If he even knew. If he would care. The department filed the case away fast. The Internal Review Board, made up of the same officers who worked under Holt, rubber-stamped the report. Use of force deemed justified. There was no press conference. No protest. Just a closing paragraph added to the file. The case is closed. No further action required. By Friday, Holt and Tucker were back on patrol. Back in their cruiser. Driving the same streets. Stopping at the same diner. Laughing over black coffee like nothing had happened. Like Evelyn Carter was just another name. Another line in a report. And the town. The town did what it always did. It moved on. Slowly but surely. The flowers placed at the intersection where Evelyn died wilted within a week. The rain washed away the blood. And the people, they stopped talking about it. Because what was there to say? This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It wasn't even the worst. Just the latest. But some stories don't stay buried. Not forever. While Mason Hollow slipped back into routine. Far from the town's quiet streets. In a place where no one could hear the church bells or smell the cotton fields. A phone buzzed. Isaiah Carter didn't answer right away. Didn't even look at it at first. But the message came through all the same. Short. Simple. Mom's gone. They killed her. The words sat there on the cracked screen, waiting. Isaiah stared at them. His face didn't change. His hands didn't shake. But something inside him, something that had lain still for years, shifted. He didn't call back. He didn't ask questions. He just stood. Slow and deliberate. Walked to the corner of his small cabin. And pulled out a bag he hadn't touched in years. Inside, there wasn't much. A sidearm. A folded photo of his mother smiling at a summer cookout. A burner phone. Isaiah Carter had spent years learning how to vanish. How to erase himself from every system. But what Holt and Tucker didn't know. What Mason Hollow had forgotten. Was that sometimes the ghosts come back. And when they do, they don't come to talk. They come to finish what others started. The phone stopped buzzing, but the message stayed. Burned into the screen, the same way it burned into Isaiah Carter's mind. He sat there in the dim light of his cabin. The cold wind from Montana's open plains rattling against the windowpane. His fingers traced the edges of the cracked burner phone. Not because he needed to reread the words. But because he couldn't stop them from replaying in his head. Mom's gone. They killed her. Isaiah didn't move for a long time. His breathing stayed steady. Controlled. His pulse unchanged. But inside, something shifted. Like the quiet click of a weapon sliding into place. The cabin where he lived wasn't much. A single room. A cot in the corner. A wood stove for heat. Shelves lined with books and old maps. No pictures on the walls. No reminders of the life he'd left behind. Except for one thing. A small photograph tucked into the corner of a cracked mirror. His mother, smiling. Standing beneath the heavy branches of a magnolia tree. The sunlight catching her eyes just right. Isaiah stood slowly. Walked over to the mirror. Pulled the photo down. Ran his thumb along the edge. Tracing the faint crease that split it down the middle. He hadn't looked at it in months. Maybe years. But now. Now it felt heavier in his hand. Like it carried more than just memory. Like it carried weight. He turned toward the metal footlocker tucked beneath the cot. Kneeled. Opened it. Inside was a duffel bag. Nothing fancy, just what he needed. A few changes of clothes. A sidearm. A spare magazine. A combat knife. And an old, worn field notebook. Pages filled with the kind of things he never wanted to forget. Not missions. Not names. But patterns. Routines. The rhythms of the people who ran the world behind the scenes. Because Isaiah Carter hadn't just served. He'd hunted. He'd dismantled entire systems from the inside out. Quietly. Surgically. No footprints. No fingerprints. Just results. That's why he disappeared when his last mission ended. Not because he was running from something. But because he was finally free of it. And because he knew. If he stayed in the world too long. The world would keep asking him to do the kinds of things no one should be asked to do. But now. Now the world had asked one more time. And this time, it was personal. He packed with methodical calm. A set of black jeans. A jacket sturdy enough for the cold. His burner phone. A backup weapon. A photo of his mother, folded twice, tucked into the inner pocket of his coat. The drive from Montana to Alabama would take him nearly a full day. He wouldn't stop. Wouldn't sleep. Wouldn't eat. Not until he was back in Mason Hollow. Not until he stood where she'd fallen. He slipped the duffel over his shoulder. Stepped out into the cold night. Locked the cabin door behind him. Not because anyone would come looking. But because leaving things unfinished had never been his style. The old pickup he kept hidden under a tarp behind the shed roared to life on the first try. He sat behind the wheel for a moment. Hands resting on the steering wheel. Eyes fixed on the horizon. The stars stretched overhead. Clear and sharp in the Montana sky. But Isaiah wasn't looking at the stars. He was already somewhere else. The road stretched out long and empty beneath his tires. Miles rolling by without a word. Isaiah didn't need music. Didn't need company. The hum of the engine and the steady thrum of his heartbeat were enough. Somewhere between Kansas and Mississippi, the memories started pressing in. Not the good ones. Not the backyard cookouts or the long talks on the porch. The bad ones. The missions. The faces of the men he'd watched, waited for, and then taken down. Men who thought they were untouchable. Men who believed the badge, the title, the uniform made them immune. They weren't. No one was. Isaiah Carter had spent years learning that there's no such thing as a ghost. Not really. There are just men who know how to disappear until the time is right. And when the time is right, they come back. By the time he crossed into Alabama, the sky had shifted from black to deep gray. The first hints of dawn breaking along the horizon. Mason Hollow wasn't far now. Just a few more miles of two-lane roads. Winding between cotton fields and old crumbling barns. He didn't head for his sister's house. Didn't check in with anyone. That wasn't why he was here. Isaiah pulled off the road at the corner of Sycamore and 3rd. The place where the flashing lights had spun. Where the bullets had flown. Where his mother's life had ended in the quiet darkness. The cruiser was long gone. The scene cleaned up. But the stain remained. Not the blood. The town had washed that away. But the memory of it. That was harder to scrub clean. Isaiah stepped out of the truck. The cold air biting against his skin. He stood there for a moment. Hands in his coat pockets. Eyes scanning the intersection. No one else was there. No passing cars. No curious eyes peeking from behind drawn curtains. Just the hum of a streetlight overhead. Flickering slightly in the early morning breeze. He knelt down. Pressed one hand flat against the cold pavement where she'd fallen. Closed his eyes. Felt the roughness beneath his palm. The crack in the asphalt. The slight rise where the curb met the gutter. This was where it started. And this was where it would end. He stood slowly. Turned back toward the truck. And climbed behind the wheel. Mason Hollow wouldn't know he was here. Not yet. But it would soon. The thing about coming home to a place like Mason Hollow is that the streets always look the same. The old storefronts with their faded signs. The diner with its crooked neon open sign flickering through the night. The courthouse clock that always ran 5 minutes slow. From the outside, it felt like nothing ever changed here. But Isaiah Carter knew better. He sat in the driver's seat of his truck. Parked 2 blocks away from the town square. Watching. The morning light had crept in slow. Painting everything in shades of gray and gold. It would be a few more hours before the streets filled with life. Before the bakery's doorbell chimed with customers. Before the sheriff's cruiser rolled by like clockwork. But Isaiah didn't need to wait for that. He already knew what he'd see. This wasn't the first time he'd studied a place like this. Every town, every system, every routine. They all had patterns. You just had to know where to look. And Isaiah had spent his life learning how to see what others missed. He eased the truck into gear and pulled away from the curb, keeping to the side streets, out of sight. He wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. The first stop wasn't the sheriff's station. It wasn't even the diner where Holt and Tucker liked to sit, drinking their coffee black and strong, laughing like they hadn't murdered a woman in cold blood just days before. No. Isaiah had something else in mind. He drove past the old train depot, past the high school football field where the paint on the bleachers peeled in the summer heat, until he reached the edge of town. There, tucked behind a chain-link fence with a sagging gate, sat the impound lot. It wasn't much. Just a stretch of cracked pavement and rusted metal. Rows of cars left behind for one reason or another. Some seized for unpaid tickets. Others never claimed after accidents. And one that belonged to Evelyn Carter. Isaiah parked just beyond the line of sight, stepped out, and walked the perimeter. The fence was nothing. A pair of wire cutters. A few careful snips. And he was through. He moved like a shadow, slipping between the rows of forgotten vehicles, until he found it. Her car. An old sedan. Paint faded from years beneath the Alabama sun. The passenger side mirror cracked. It looked the same as it always had. But now it was different. Now it was evidence. He crouched beside it. Scanned the tires. The windows. The seams along the doors. Cleaned too fast. Too perfect. They'd wiped it down. Made sure there'd be no questions. But Isaiah wasn't looking for questions. He was looking for answers. He pulled on a pair of gloves. Slid the driver's side door open. The smell of old upholstery and faint traces of peppermint candies filled the cabin. The dashboard still held the little cross Evelyn had kept there for years. And in the passenger seat, the floor mat stained faintly dark. A mark left behind from the blood they hadn't bothered to clean. Isaiah leaned back, his jaw tightening. They thought this would be enough. That a fresh coat of silence would bury the truth. He closed the door gently, moved back through the lot, and slipped out the way he came. No alarms. No witnesses. Just the quiet scrape of wire cutters. And the steady rhythm of his boots on gravel. The sun was higher now. The town was waking up. He knew where Holt and Tucker would be. Same place they always were around this time. The Chrome Diner off Route 16. Same corner booth. Same routine. Isaiah parked a block away. Walked the distance, keeping to the alleys. His hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. He stopped at the edge of a laundromat parking lot. Crouched behind a faded delivery van. And watched through the diner's front window. There they were. Holt and Tucker. Same uniforms. Same smug posture. Holt sat back against the booth. One arm draped lazily along the top of the seat. His other hand stirring a cup of coffee. Tucker leaned forward. Elbows on the table. Laughing at something Holt had just said. No body armor. No tension. Just two men who believed the town belonged to them. Isaiah studied their movements. The way Holt scanned the room every few minutes. Checking the exits without even realizing it. The way Tucker's knee bounced beneath the table. A nervous twitch that spoke louder than words. They'd done this so many times. It had become muscle memory. And that was their weakness. Routines. Patterns. Isaiah pulled out a small notebook. Flipped to a blank page. And began logging every detail. Time. Movements. Reactions. He recorded how long they stayed. What they ordered. How Holt always took his coffee black. And Tucker dumped in too much sugar. It wasn't enough to confront them. Not yet. That would come later. Right now. He needed to learn them. Every habit. Every blind spot. Because when the time came, there wouldn't be any mistakes. He stayed there for hours. Moving from one vantage point to another. Watching. Waiting. Recording. That night. He parked 2 blocks from the sheriff's station. And watched again. Holt and Tucker left at the same time they always did. Their cruiser rolled down Main Street. Headlights cutting through the dark. Isaiah followed at a distance. Never close enough to be seen. Never far enough to lose them. He tracked them through the residential neighborhoods. The industrial park. The back roads that looped around the edge of town. They didn't know anyone was watching. But Isaiah saw it all. The next night, the same. And the night after that. He followed again. Patterns. Always patterns. But on the third night, something shifted. He spotted a third figure. Not Holt. Not Tucker. A younger officer. Rookie. Different patrol car. Isaiah hung back. Watched as the young officer stopped just outside the diner. Parked 2 blocks away. And stared at the cruiser inside. The rookie wasn't just on patrol. He was watching too. Isaiah leaned back against the seat of his truck. A faint smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. He wasn't the only ghost in Mason Hollow. Someone else had questions. And soon. They'd get answers. Isaiah Carter had always known that the truth doesn't just sit there waiting to be found. You have to dig for it. Hunt for it. Tear away the layers that the world piles on top. And when you do, what you uncover isn't always clean. But it's always there. If you know how to look. 3 nights of watching Sheriff Holt and Deputy Tucker. 3 nights of learning their routes, their rhythms, their blind spots. And now, something new. That young officer, the rookie. Isaiah didn't know his name yet. Didn't know his story. But one thing was clear, the kid was out of place. He wasn't part of Holt's circle. He wasn't laughing over coffee. He was sitting in his cruiser 2 blocks away, watching. Just like Isaiah. And Isaiah knew that look. He'd seen it before in men who were still figuring out how deep the rot went. The look of someone who hadn't given up yet. The look of someone who still believed that the badge meant something. So Isaiah followed him too. Not close. Not direct. Just enough to learn the rookie's patterns. His name, as it turned out, was Caleb Morris. 29. Transferred from a bigger department up north. One that had worn him down with too many overdoses. Too many late-night calls that ended with the sound of gunfire. He'd come to Mason Hollow for peace. A slower life. But peace doesn't come easy in a town built on silence. Isaiah watched as Morris worked his shifts. Patrol routes that avoided the same streets Holt and Tucker claimed as their territory. He noticed the hesitation in Morris's eyes every time he passed the intersection where Evelyn Carter had been gunned down. The rookie knew something wasn't right. He just didn't know how deep it went yet. Isaiah set up in the old mechanics lot just outside of town. Where the Wi-Fi bled in from the gas station 2 streets over. Pulled out the burner laptop, rigged together with pieces scavenged from pawn shops and surplus stores. He jacked into the town's public network. Bypassed the weak firewalls. Tapped into the Mason Hollow police database. Nothing direct. Nothing that would set off alarms. He slipped in quiet. Pulled down traffic reports. Shift logs. Payroll stubs. And there, between the lines, he started to see it. Holt and Tucker were working overtime. More than their schedules showed. More than the town's budget accounted for. A pattern that stretched back months. Even years. The payments didn't add up. Extra shifts tied to special assignments that never made it into official reports. Patrol logs that vanished. Body cam footage that never existed. But that wasn't all. Isaiah traced the flow of money further. Into vendors. Equipment suppliers. Community outreach programs that didn't exist outside of tax filings. Shell companies. Routed through a logistics firm 2 counties over. A firm flagged in a DEA investigation 5 years back. Cartel ties, buried before it ever went to trial. And Sheriff Holt. He was right in the middle of it. It wasn't just about power. It was about business. The kind of business that turned a blind eye to shipments rolling through the back roads. The kind of business that kept towns like Mason Hollow quiet. Evelyn Carter wasn't just a woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was a loose thread in a system built to stay hidden. Isaiah leaned back in the rusted folding chair. Eyes fixed on the screen as the pieces fell into place. Holt and Tucker weren't working alone. They were part of something bigger. Something that ran deeper than just 2 corrupt cops. He shut the laptop. Tucked it back into the duffel bag. And stood. His body ached from sitting too long. The old injury in his shoulder flaring up as he stretched. But the pain didn't matter. What mattered was the plan. Isaiah knew he couldn't just tear it down all at once. Systems like this didn't break from the outside. They cracked from within. He needed pressure points. Weak links. And Caleb Morris, he was one of them. Isaiah waited until Morris's shift ended. Followed him back to the small apartment complex on the edge of town. Where the rookie lived alone. No family. No visitors. Just a man trying to figure out how far he was willing to bend before he broke. At midnight, Isaiah slipped a note under Morris's door. No threats. No demands. Just a message, written in block letters. You know what they did. Meet me at the impound lot. Midnight tomorrow. Come alone. The next night, Isaiah watched from the shadows as Morris arrived. Nervous. Hands in his pockets. Looking over his shoulder, like he half expected this to be a setup. Isaiah stepped out from the dark. Slow. Deliberate. His face hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. You've been watching them, Isaiah said. His voice low. Steady. Just like me. Morris froze. Who are you? The one asking the questions you're too scared to say out loud. Morris glanced around. Shifting from foot to foot. If you're looking for trouble. I'm looking for the truth, Isaiah interrupted. Morris swallowed hard. His jaw clenched. You don't know what's going on here. I know enough, Isaiah said. I know what they did to Evelyn Carter. And I know why. Morris flinched at the name. You saw the reports, Isaiah pressed. You've seen the gaps. The footage that went missing. The shifts that don't make sense. You've been putting it together, haven't you? Morris's hands balled into fists at his sides. If I speak up, they'll bury me. Just like they buried her. Isaiah took a step closer. His voice a quiet growl. Then maybe it's time we dig them out first. The two stood there. The silence stretching between them. Heavy as iron. Finally, Morris let out a long breath. Shaking his head. I've been pulling files. Grabbing what I can off the servers at night. But it's not enough. They've covered their tracks too well. Isaiah's eyes narrowed. Then we'll make them trip over their own lies. And just like that. The plan shifted. Isaiah wasn't working alone anymore. Now, they had a foothold. And Mason Hollow's silence. It was about to break. It's one thing to watch from the outside. To study the routines, the patterns, the blind spots. But it's another thing entirely to step into the game and start moving the pieces yourself. Isaiah Carter had done it before. In places where the language changed but the rules stayed the same. Broken governments. Warlords in sharp suits. Men who believed they'd built something too strong to crumble. But every system, no matter how big, always had cracks. And sometimes, all it took was the right pressure at the right moment. In Mason Hollow, the cracks were already there. Holt and Tucker just didn't know it yet. Isaiah sat in the dark of the mechanic's lot. The glow of his laptop casting shadows across the rusted walls. Caleb Morris had delivered what he could. Partial patrol logs. Inventory reports. Fragments of erased body cam footage that the system hadn't fully wiped. Not enough to bring the house down. But enough to know where the walls were weakest. They worked in silence, night after night. Morris would drop off files on a flash drive. Careful never to use the same route twice. Isaiah would cross-check the data. Map out the shifts, the gaps, the patterns Holt and Tucker didn't even realize they'd fallen into. It wasn't just where they went. It was how they moved. How Holt drove with one hand resting on the steering wheel at the 11 o'clock position. How Tucker always tapped his foot on the floorboard when they turned onto the industrial bypass. How their cruiser headlights flickered at the same pothole on Elm Street, because they always hit it just a little too fast. Every detail mattered. Isaiah mapped it all. Then he started adjusting it. It began small. A false dispatch call sent through the system. An anonymous tip about a suspicious vehicle parked behind the old grain silo. Holt and Tucker responded like they always did. Cleared it fast. Shrugged it off. But the real move wasn't the call. It was the timing. It shifted their route by 10 minutes. Just enough to push them through the south end of town, at a different hour. Isaiah adjusted again the next night. Another call. This time, about a broken-down truck on the county line. Another detour. Another shift in the routine. Piece by piece, he rewrote their rhythm. He didn't need them to notice. Not yet. He just needed them to move where he wanted, when he wanted. And they did. But it wasn't enough to set the stage. Isaiah needed control. Real control. So he planted decoys. Disrupted the traffic cameras near the east entrance to town. Just long enough to make sure there were no eyes on the roads he cared about. He jammed the cruiser's radio signal for 30 seconds at a time. Disguised as static interference. A hiccup in the system. Nothing worth a second glance. He shifted their world inch by inch. Until they were driving straight into his. And at the center of that world. An intersection. Elm and Grant. Narrow streets. Faded storefronts. One streetlight that flickered every third cycle. Isaiah had scouted it. Mapped every angle. Every shadow. Every line of sight. He knew how long it would take for a cruiser to roll through. How the headlights would bend around the corner. How the blind spots would overlap. It wasn't just an ambush. It was a kill box. But Isaiah didn't want them dead. Not yet. Death would be too easy. He wanted them to feel the weight of every choice they'd made. The night came soft and quiet. The kind of night where the town felt like it had gone to sleep. No wind. No rain. Just the hum of distant streetlights and the occasional bark of a stray dog. Isaiah parked his SUV 3 blocks out. Hidden beneath the shadows of an abandoned warehouse. The engine was silent. The headlights dark. He checked his gear. Not much. A sidearm with a suppressor. A set of tire spikes rolled up tight beneath the seat. A radio jammer tuned specifically to the sheriff's frequency. And a small transmitter that looped the cruiser's GPS signal, just enough to keep them invisible for the next 10 minutes. Then he waited. At exactly 5:56 a.m., Holt and Tucker rolled out of the diner. Same booth. Same coffee. Same jokes. They climbed into their cruiser. Settled into the comfort of routine. And drove straight into the loop Isaiah had created for them. He followed from a distance. Lights off. Watching their taillights bounce through the dark like a heartbeat. By the time they reached Elm and Grant, everything was in place. Isaiah rolled the SUV forward. Slow. Precise. Staying out of the cruiser's mirrors. He deployed the tire spikes across the alleyway just behind the intersection. Quiet. Efficient. Holt and Tucker wouldn't even know they were boxed in. Until it was too late. Then he jammed their radio. 30 seconds of silence. And in that silence, Isaiah moved. He edged the SUV into position. A shadow within a shadow. Parked just beyond the streetlight's reach. The cruiser rolled to a stop at the red light. Holt's fingers tapped the steering wheel. Tucker scrolled through his phone. They didn't see him. Not yet. Isaiah's breathing slowed. His hands steady. His focus, sharp. He didn't think about what came next. He didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't rage. It was something colder. Something sharper. It was balance. He reached for the suppressor. Twisted it into place. Lined up the shot. But he didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. Because Isaiah Carter knew one thing better than anyone else. Timing. And tonight, timing was everything. The world held still at the corner of Elm and Grant. The sheriff's cruiser idled beneath the flicker of a tired streetlight. Its engine humming low. Headlights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Inside, Holt sat behind the wheel. Tapping a rhythm against the steering wheel with 2 fingers. Bored. Tucker leaned against the passenger door. Half scrolling through his phone. Eyes glazed. Routine. That was the word that described their nights. Predictable. Comfortable. They didn't know tonight was different. They didn't feel the shift that had been building for days, one nudge at a time. Isaiah Carter had turned their routine into a trap. And now they were sitting square in the middle of it.